Welcome back. In this lesson, we'll take a look at copying the process data from our data lake to the Azure SQL database. So we are going to start with the cases and deaths data, so that it's copied from a processed folder in the storage account or the data lake to the SQL database so that it could easily be reported from a tool like Power BI or anything similar. So let's switch over to Azure Portal and get started. Okay, here we are in the Azure Portal. The first thing we want to do is to create the SQL tables that are required and to which we are going to copy the data into. So let's head over to our dashboard where we pinned our SQL database previously. So let's click on that, and this gives you a query editor that you can use to create the tables. So you need to log in with the admin user that you created previously. So let's log in. But you can see here we are getting error as this IP is not allowed. So here to allow the IP, we need to click on this given URL. This will add the IP into allowed list. Now let's try to log in again. And we log in successfully. As you can see here, this is not good interface. You can see to query the SQL database. You've got the options of Azure Data Studio, like here, or SSMS. So if you want to use one of them, feel free to do that. But I'm going to go ahead and do this so that it'll be easier for everyone not to download another tool to do this exercise. In order to create the tables, I've already created the script that will create the tables, and that's part of the course material. So download the script for that, and then you can use it. I'm going to open mine up here. So that is this one here. Create COVID tables ddl.sql. Let me walk you through this. So this creates the schema COVID reporting, and under the schema we are going to create the three tables here. The cases and deaths, hospital admissions, and the testing table. So we are going to create a pipeline to populate the cases and deaths table in this lesson. And then this will be an assignment in the next lesson. And this one, build it together. So I'll walk you through that in the following lesson. So let's click on Run, and let's see the result. So as you can see, the query has succeeded, and we should be able to see the tables underneath here. So we can see all the tables here. That's great. So we've done what we want to do within SQL. And the next thing we want to do is to go ahead and create the pipeline for us. Let's now head over to the Data Factory, and we want to create a pipeline, so we could use the existing pipeline, because we got one for processing the cases and deaths data. So we've transformed the data in the data flow, and then you can have another activity to copy the data into SQL here. But we are not going to do that. We are going to create a separate pipeline, because I want to be able to test that separately, rather than having to execute both of them every time we want to test it. But in real projects, you would want to have them one after the other, so that you've got the dependency established already. So I'm going to create a new pipeline, and I'm going to call this one as PL SQL Cases and Deaths Data. Next we need to pull in a copy activity. So that'll be the move and transform. Let's pull that one through. And I'm going to call this one as Copy Cases and Deaths. Okay, cool. You can leave this as default, but normally I would prefer changing the time out to a lower time in source. We want to have the processed source. So as you can see here, we got the DS processed cases and deaths. That's where we got our transformed data. So let's do that. So processed cases and deaths, and that should be sufficient, I think. And let's do sync and sync. We don't have a sync for our SQL database at the moment, SQL table at the moment. So let's create one. So click on New, and this is going to be an Azure SQL database. So let's pick Azure SQL from here and then click Continue. And I'm going to call this one as DS SQL Cases and Deaths. So we also need a new link service because we haven't created one yet for the SQL database. So let's do that from here. We normally tend to do everything in our Manage button here, but this is another option. So let's do that in here. So click New, and then I'm going to call this one as LS SQL COVID DB, and let's pick it up from our subscription. So that is going to be pay as you go. And the server name is COVID Project Learn ADF SRV, and the database name will be COVID DB. And we can use the SQL authentication. So let's do that. So that's going to be the admin user that we created previously. And let me key my password as well. Okay, let's do a test connection and it should succeed. Yep, and click create. So we got the link service now, and let's pick the table. In this case, we want the cases and deaths table, and we can import the schema because the table already exists, and click OK. Okay, so that's created the data set here. And also if we head over to our Manage button, and we can see the SQL database created a link service created as well. Let's go back to our Author tab, and we've got the pipeline. So let's go to the options for the copy data activity. So under the source we've got our source data set already, but one thing to remember is because it is pointing to a folder, we need to say we want to pick all the files under that. So that will be a wildcard path with the star. Let me show you in the Storage Explorer what I mean. So that'll be here. As you can see, under Processed ECDC Cases and Deaths is a folder, and we want to pick all the files from there. At the moment, we've only got one file. So we say actually it's wildcard file path and then star. So it'll just know actually whether to pick up that file. If you want to give the exact file name, you can do as well. So that's that. And for the sync, let's go over the options because we haven't seen one before for SQL. So you specify the sync data set, and then if you have a stored procedure you can specify that here, but we don't have one. And if the table doesn't exist, then it'll auto-create a table. But the only one thing to remember is most of the time everything is created with a string structure or a varchar structure in them. So it's better to create the tables ourselves and then point the copy activity to load the data. And if you have a pre-copy script which you can specify, in our case we do need one because we want to truncate our table before we load it, because ours is a full refresh every time and we don't want to be keeping all the data from yesterday in today's load. And you'll end up having duplicate data. So you want to truncate the table before you load it. So let me pick the table name from here. So that's the table name. So I'm going to do that, and you can specify whatever pre-copy script you want to do. In my case, we want to truncate the table and then load it. And you've got these standard batch time out and then the batch sizes and concurrent sessions and things like that. Mapping, you can specify mappings. But in our case, it's a one-to-one mapping our input. The process doesn't have a structure at the moment, so let's leave it as blank. But if you want to alter the mapping to map different fields to different target fields, then you could specify the mapping here. And that's everything. And I'm going to click on Debug to run the pipeline. Okay, so the pipeline succeeded. Let's have a look at the statistics. So it's taken one file, 16,390 records, and then loaded them in here. So let's switch over to the SQL query editor and let's run a new query. So that's our table. I'm going to do a select asterisk from the table just to make sure that we got the data as we expected. Okay, so all the data looks as we expected. That's brilliant. So that's the end of this lesson. I'll see you in the next one.